You can see how much damage the chain has done to the actual tensioner. But look at that. This is actually very, I mean, I would say this is pretty good news. This is all that it was. This is all rod bearing here. It's all metal. This is all glitter. This is very, very bad. Hello, if you're new to the channel, this here is my Touareg. It had low oil pressure issues with this engine, which is why I ended up buying another Touareg from one of my subscribers. Supposedly it should have a good motor, even though the rest of the car is in pretty bad shape, so I bought it as a parts car. I've pulled both of the engines. Whatever's in better shape on this engine, I'm gonna take off and put onto this. And then eventually, once it's all back together, it's gonna go back into the car. So before I pulled this motor, I took off the timing covers, and I did notice that the timing belt is very loose. Potentially this is relatively normal for an engine that's set for a long time. It does lose tension, I suppose, without spinning. I could be wrong. That's just like something that would sort of make sense, because technically there is tension over here, right? By the tensioner, we got tension. Under the camshafts, we got tension. So maybe, just maybe, when the engine sits long enough, maybe this cam just under tension sort of rotates back and this happens. That motor does have good camshaft chains, so I'm going to take those off of that engine with the tensioners, which were installed relatively recently, and put them onto this. I think the timing belt is going to stay, because I do know that this timing belt was replaced not too long ago. And as you can see now, we did gain that tension back. On these engines, the top dead center is achieved when the big holes on the camshafts face towards each other. As you can see, this cam bar is specifically designed for this car and specific length, and it also does have a smaller knob on the outside, bigger knob on the inside. There's also a crank pin located on the driver's side, or the left side of the motor. You would install this to keep the crankshaft from spinning. This is supposed to line up with these two marks here. And now to confirm that the camshafts are in time with the crankshaft, we just put this guy on, and if it goes on, it means that everything's fine. There we go. So now the motor is at top dead center. Now that this is confirmed, we can go back to the other engine. I'm gonna use the same timing cover from the other motor. Everything is great on this engine too, apart from the fact that it chewed itself up a lot with the low oil pressure. We're going to rotate the accessory belt clockwise. Now that I have this beautiful necklace, we can take off the crank pulley bolts. They're H6 Allen keys. Oh, we don't want that happening. This is why you'd want to have the crank pin in place. Luckily, with the motor out of the car, it is pretty easy to locate the crankshaft pin. It is directly behind the motor mount. With the plug out of the car, we can put in the crank pin. It is a pretty tight tolerance in there, so if you're not in complete top dead center, it will not go in. We can test that by taking off these bolts. As you can see, there was zero movement in the crankshaft because the pin holds it in place. I did have this pulley off not too long ago, so it doesn't take that much force to get it off. However, if you are doing this for the first time, it will probably be quite a bit of a pain to get this pulley off. Now that the belt in this bolt is off, we can try and get these pulleys out. Okay, doesn't want to go. Ta-da! Camshaft position sensor. And now we just have to repeat the same process on the other engine. So something I just noticed is that looks like somebody really over-torqued these valve cover bolts. As you can see, the actual valve cover is cracked in multiple mounting locations. So you might have noticed that this cover situation doesn't really look very good. The reason why I'm doing it this way is because sometimes this gear or pulley, whatever you want to call it, has a really hard time coming off of the camshaft. So I decided not to even bother, and then I just unbolt these two nuts and the three bolts that hold this cover in place, and that just comes out with the camshaft. But based on the discoloration and the oil residue on these tensioners, they look OEM. Doesn't look like they were ever changed. However, the good news is that the pads never broke, at least on this bank. So we don't have any chunks of that elsewhere in the motor, which, based on my understanding, is the reason why I'm having low oil pressure issues on my Volkswagen, on my motor. I did order a new valve cover gasket kit, so we're going to install that. Next, I need to compress the chain tensioner, for which I'm using one of these pretty cheap tools. I think you can get like a 2-pack of them on Amazon for $10. You will see that a lot of people complain about stripping these, and that is mainly because people end up over-tightening it just because they don't know any better. In reality, it really doesn't take that much force to compress these tensioners all the way, and you don't have to crank on it much at all. As you can see, I'm currently compressing it simply with my fingers. So I'm going to slide this into the chain, and then lastly, we got to get the other camshaft in here. Okay, so I currently have the camshafts in time. There's an appropriate amount of links, which is 16 between the two marks on each camshaft. Now all of the cam bridges are torqued down, and we should be ready to apply some of the last RTV in a few places and putting the valve cover back on. Okay, so on the passenger side, looks like we're not so lucky in terms of the timing chain and timing chain tensioners. I can see the top pad. That actually seems to be in decent shape, so my best guess is that the bottom one is all broken to pieces. You can see a couple more right here. I might have to take off the oil pan and inspect it. We'll see how bad this tensioner is. Yeah, this really is not supposed to come out, so we have some major issues on the bottom pad of this tensioner. Here's some of the chunks that I was able to fish out. The rest of these are probably, hopefully, at the bottom of the oil pan. I'm gonna have to take that off and get rid of these. But this bottom pad completely smoked. You can see how much damage the chain has done to the actual tensioner. Looks like this thing ended up getting rotated, and the chain was just riding on this guy under an angle. So what that tells me is that you really need to replace these. This should be a maintenance item every 100,000 miles, because they will always break. Even if you properly maintain your car and do enough oil changes, as you can see with this one, they do wear out and they do fall apart, and this happens. Last night my friend and I managed to get this motor off of its subframe, and we did also take the oil pan off. The reason why I did that is to look for those chunks of the tensioner, because we're definitely missing a decent amount of that pad. So far it has not been found. As you can see right here, this is our lower oil pan, and to take off the upper oil pan, this is the drain plug for it, we would have to take all of this and then some bolts on the interior of the motor and stuff like that. So I'm assuming that's where they are. However, if I do try and reach in with fingers, even though I can't really reach that far in there, I do not feel anything on my fingers. I don't feel any chunks. So the question is whether I really want to go all out and take off the upper pan and look for those chunks, or if I want to just putting the lower oil pan back on and just going for it and hoping that I don't get any low oil pressure issues. I think what might have happened with this motor is that the reason why I got the low oil pressure issue is just due to oil gunk or just engine gunk that happened due to infrequent oil changes. A quick overview of how to take the subframe off of this. It was actually pretty simple. There's definitely a multitude of ways of doing this. Like you could have kept the front diff with the motor, but we needed this off anyway. So all we did was disconnected the drive shaft going to the front diff. We took off the exhaust along with the cross brace. I'd say that was actually a pretty easy job. The main issue is just the fact that it's so heavy. It was pretty hard, even with 2 people, it was pretty hard to lift this up enough and then get the transfer case up to be able to slide this from under it. But now I have to do this same thing on this motor, which is probably going to be harder because it's on jack and wheel dolly combination. Right now my next task is to free up the hoist by setting this down, hopefully on these tires. Okay, all the pressure's off the hoist. Now we gotta figure out a way to get this off of the legs of the hoist. Having this engine bracket is sort of helpful because that is going to protect the oil pan from getting damaged if I let the motor sit on it. But I think I'm going to use this bracket to try and get this motor on this dolly. That way it's sort of movable. Look at that, it's pretty movable. Very nice. Now to get this motor and transmission off this subframe, all we have to do is disconnect this drive shaft. And to do that, we just unbolt these, and then we have to give it some decent hits with a hammer to get it to slide off of this flange. Oh wow, this one actually came out much easier than the one on the other car. But again, that car was just a lot more rusty than this one. And there's one more thing. Just this power steering line, and it uses a 22mm bolt to hold it in place. Then we want to feed this out from this little hook that holds it in place and pull it out in a way that it does not interfere with the engine bracket or anything else that's going to come up with the engine and transmission. And depending on where you disconnected your heater lines, they may get tangled up as well. Now, one of the issues I'm seeing already is that the legs are not wide enough to go around these dollies. Something to note is that I am expecting for the subframe to slide off the jacks. As soon as the motor is off of it, it is going to be going up tilted because we're only going from one corner of the motor. The subframe is most likely going to slide off of the jack stands. There it is. That's exactly what I was talking about. Like I said, we expected this, we were prepared. And that too. All right. Doesn't seem to be too heavy, even with the transfer case on it, so I'm gonna try and pull this. That went about as good as I expected it to go. So now I just have to place this somewhere where it's not gonna get in my way. What just happened? We're just gonna try and flip this onto that. As unlikely as it is for this to work, I'm gonna give it a shot and see what happens. After all, I don't really care about this engine a whole lot. Oh God, this is gonna be violent. So what I'm working on today is figuring out why is my Touareg engine, this guy, is having low oil pressure issues. So there's definitely more pieces of plastic somewhere inside this engine. I wasn't able to find them. I took off the lower oil pan and I didn't see them. So it's either they're still stuck somewhere up top or maybe they're in the upper oil pan, and I don't really know how hard it is to get that off. So I'm using my old motor that I don't really care about to take things apart and find out if it's worth tearing this engine apart and trying to make sure that we don't have those oil pressure issues again on the second engine. So this right here is the reason why we can't do this with the engine still in the car. This one thing has caused weeks worth of work for me. Perfect. So now we're just going to remove all these 10 millimeters for the oil pan. Oh no. For some reason, I thought I had completely drained the oil. I guess I did not. But look at that. This is actually very, I would say this is pretty good news. This is all that it was causing our oil pressure issues. Look at that. All kinds of crap in here. So for one, we have a bunch of RTV. Secondly, we do have some chunks of tensioner, but mostly RTV. And I do know why the RTV got in there. The previous owner of this engine and car did the cam chains on this, and I did notice that they used obscene amounts of RTV. Like, it was all over wiring, it was everywhere on the exterior of the motor. But this shows us that it was also on the interior of the motor. And here we go. That's why we're having oil pressure issues. And I know for a fact that we don't have this on the other engines. So hopefully we're not going to have any oil pressure issues there. So fingers crossed, considering the fact that I've taken off the span, I saw the pickup tube and it was fine. And then I'm the one who did the chains on this one, and I think I was pretty conservative with the RTV. Hopefully we're not gonna have these issues. Another thing is that it seems like, I think there's a decent chance that they had the valve cover off for some time and the car was just sitting in their shop and all kinds of crap was getting under the valve cover, causing all the debris that made their way down into the oil pan. I hope that's not gonna be the case here. I think I did a pretty good job at making sure that doesn't happen. And if it does, and if I do end up having oil pressure issues on this engine, what I think I would do is try and get that subframe off the car. So now that I have a pretty good idea of what this all looks like, I think I could get the subframe off and then take off this bracket with the motor still in the car. I could be totally wrong. Not sure, but I think that's a possibility. In reality, all we have to do is drop the subframe, which is these 4 bolts. I would most likely keep the front diff and the steering rack in place, and then somehow, some way get this off. This would definitely be pretty hard because looking at it attached to the motor, you would have to remove these 2 nuts on each side. And imagine this in the engine bay. There's really not a lot of room here as it is. You wouldn't be able to see anything, not to mention the fact that you would have to get past the exhaust manifold and reach into here to take off the 16 millimeter. And hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully we do not have any oil pressure issues on this motor. This is all rod bearing here. It's all metal. This is all glitter. This is very, very bad. So my next steps are to get this engine and transmission onto that subframe. It's mainly just that shaft going to the front diff from the transfer case, then the downpipes, and then the best part of all is going to be getting this snapped bolt out of here. That is gonna be something that's gonna make me kill myself. So things are not going very smoothly here at my shop. There's still a few things I need to wrap up with this project before I put the engine back into the car. And that's where we're running into a lot of issues. As you would imagine, with a project like this, when you're pulling out the engine and taking off the majority of the car off of the car, you'll find a lot of broken things. You know, this car is 20 years old. This is something Volkswagen came up with, which is kind of cool. I don't know, maybe Audi came up with it first. Basically, there's flaps inside the intake manifold that vary based on your RPM, your speed, whatever. They're aimed to improve the performance to the maximum and allow, it basically varies the airflow within the intake. I don't know what all of this is called, but basically this guy uses vacuum to pull this rod, and then that pulls this, and that moves the flap inside the intake. These rods break a lot, which is why I have a DIY rod right here, made out of a plastic pen, like for writing, and some zip ties, and they seem to be holding on pretty good. That's one of the issues I fixed, which took a little while, but it's not as bad as the next two problems. This here is the drive shaft that came out of the car that I'm sitting under, my Touareg, not the parts car. And it has a few very common issues, such as the drive shaft carrier bearing bushing. So as you can see, this here is a bearing. It allows the drive shaft to slide on it. There's a bushing, rubber bushing, that is supposed to dampen the vibrations and make the car a little more comfortable. And it is very common for these bushings to fall apart, especially at this age, as you would imagine. So that's exactly what happened with mine. Mine is pretty much destroyed. The good news, however, is that the parts car came with a brand new drive shaft. Before, this car was basically given up on by previous owners. One of them replaced the drive shaft at the dealer with a brand new one, which came with a bearing, bushing, everything like that. It's very nice, it's very new. There's basically no rust on it, except for one place. Now, for the sake of quality of content, I don't want to do this. I don't want to show this to you on that car because I'll be under the car and it'll be really hard to show you properly. Basically, the back of the drive shaft that connects to the rear differential looks like this. This back plate is what bolts down to the rear differential. There are 6 bolts that are inserted from here, and they bolt up into the plate in the differential. But as you can see, first of all, this kind of comes apart, and that's where all the grease and the joints are. But the problem is that this rusty side gets inserted into this rear differential area. This little lip you can see on the differential plate basically goes right here, and that's where the drive shaft gets mounted to. Unfortunately, because of the rust that builds up here, this becomes basically forged together and really, really hard to pull off. I was able to get this one off. However, with that car being on the ground, not on the lift, with me having so much less room, so much less light, I'm having a really hard time doing that. Theoretically, all you need to do is spin the drive shaft to get it to pop off that plate. Something I've seen people do is put the car in drive with the e-brake engaged and basically just let off the brake and let the engine and transmission spin the drive shaft, or attempt to spin the drive shaft, and that basically pops it off. Sometimes you have to give it a little bit of gas. Basically, that's something that is an option. In my case, it is not, because obviously I have no engine to spin this thing. So just to give you an idea of how much force this requires, I'm gonna give it my best shot. Yeah, I think you get the idea. It is properly seized on there. And of course, I've done everything I could have on this end. I've heated it up, I've banged it with a hammer. I've asked it nicely, I've asked it not nicely, and it's just not happening. So that's basically where we're at. Like, there's only so much I can tape with this sort of stuff because it's not interesting to watch. So I gotta keep cranking away at this. I gotta get that broken bolt out somehow. No idea how I'm gonna do this. Hopefully once those two are done, we're not gonna have any more issues and we can just put this thing back together. So at this point, I think it's been about at least a week or two since I've had both of these engines out of the cars and basically ready to be reorganized and put together so that one of them is ready to go into here. But because I've been stuck on this drive shaft for like 3 days now, I was stuck on those intake flaps. I haven't been able to make much progress. So I've just been stuck on these little issues that technically are big issues, but they are small. Like, I managed to pull out the engine, but I can't take off the drive shaft. Are you kidding me? And then on top of that all, there's the biggest issue of them all. I'm not even that concerned about the drive shaft. I know it's just a matter of time. As you can tell, this is the car that's on the lift, so my Touareg. This is where the engine and subframe bolt to the frame. There's one more spot in the back. We don't need to worry about that. This guy right here. So at this point, I really don't know how long it's gonna take for me to finish this project. I really had hoped that this video would be me. In this video, the car would be ready and I would be able to test drive it. Not even close. Not even close. Which really, really sucks because this car is taking up the lift. I have like 2 more project cars, well, technically 3, that could use the lift, and I need to get under and look at whatever the situation is, and I can't because this has been out here for like a month now. Basically, it's very overwhelming. There's just a little too much, and I don't know how I can do all this. It's a lot. It's just really a lot. But yeah, I just can't wait to drive this thing. It's such a nice ride with the air suspension. It is so smooth, and it's middle of winter now. It's properly snowing. It's properly cold here in Wisconsin, and I miss having a heated steering wheel. I miss having good heat and very nicely heated seats. So, plus the ground clearance, also something I miss a lot. Overall, this thing has been a fantastic daily driver. I really miss driving it. So I just want to bring it back to life, but I don't think anyone wants to. I think it's ready to call it. I feel like I'm rambling on at this point. I'm gonna let you go. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe. Hit the like button if you feel inclined to do so, and I will see you next time. Hopefully with better news.